Hi, welcome to DVCon U.S. 2021, workshop on achieving ISO 26262 ASIL metrics using modern static and dynamic failure mode fault analysis by Optima Design Automation. The agenda today: introduction on Optima Design Automation, functional safety, hard and soft errors, a brief on ISO 26262, and Optima Safety Platform, followed by details on Optima SE static analysis, Optima HE hard error analysis, Optima SE soft error analysis, and we'll end with Q&A. Optima Design Automation is the next generation automotive functional safety tool provider founded in 2014, Nazareth, Israel. We have a portfolio of advanced solutions for complex safety and security challenges, a revolutionary high-performance fault analysis technology, and we are a well-funded organization with core team of verification and safety experts. Optima fault injection is the core of the technology, orders of magnitude faster than competing solutions. Above Optima fault injection engine, we have built Optima SA static analysis solution, Optima HE hard error analysis, Optima SE soft error mitigation analysis, and Optima SEC IC security verification. And I'm Sesha Kumar, Director of Application Engineering, and I'm a certified semiconductor automotive functional safety professional. ISO 26262 defines functional safety as the absence of unreasonable risk due to hazards caused by malfunctioning behavior of electrical and electronic systems. Average car today uses 300 processors, 50 plus complex electronic control circuits. It's used everywhere: airbag deployment, event data recorder, voice data communications, accident recorder, battery management, lane correction, parking systems, regenerative braking, etc. There are many functional safety standards that are available for each and every industry. ISO 26262 defines automotive safety standards. ISO 26262 follows a V model, which defines the verification process throughout. Functional safety issues. ISO 26262 defines random faults. Faults that occur during the operation can cause failures, termination of intended behavior. To correct random faults effects during operation, you need to use safety mechanisms. Let's consider ECU depicted here. There is a fault in RAM which can make a permanently 0 or 1, which is called as permanent fault or hard error. So how do you get away with this? You can have a safety mechanism of error correcting code. You may have fault in the sensor control unit, which makes a temporary 0 or 1, which we call it as transient fault or soft error. So how do you get away with this? So there can be a safety mechanism with hardened TMR flip-flops. So ISO 26262 certification requires proof that high proportion of faults are protected by these kind of safety mechanisms. Automotive Safety Integrity Level D, ASIL D, requires more than 99% faults to be protected. So safety mechanism is necessary to detect, mitigate, or tolerate faults or control avoid failures. We've seen three different terms: permanent fault or hard error, transient fault or soft error, and safety mechanism. Let's throw some light on these three terms. Hard errors or permanent faults. What are they? They are permanent damages to your transistors. These faults can be modeled as stuck at 0, stuck at 1, or bridging faults. What are the causes? So burn-in or wear-out or harsh environmental conditions, heat, pressure, or vibration, which is very critical to the automotive functions. How do you protect against them? So you need to implement safety mechanisms as suggested in ISO 26262, like lockstep or LBEST. Also, you need to detect faults within 0.25 or 100 milliseconds from the time they happen. These two are critical. Detecting them within the time limit and have a safety mechanism to detect or mitigate them. What are the soft errors? Soft errors are also called transient faults, SEU, single event upset, or single event transient. These are the bit flips caused by mostly the cosmic rays, radiation coming from the sun. Where do they hit? Memory bits, single or multiple bits, and how do you protect them? Bit alignment or ECC. Can also hit at the gates, combination logic gates, which we call it as SET, single event transient, and not considered by many of the experts. So the flip-flops, which we call SEU, single event upset, bit flips in a single flop, and the protection mechanism for them is the TMR and the DMR implementations. So let's also focus on what is a safety mechanism. This is the new term which we have learned. So safety mechanism can be used for detection, mitigation, or detection and mitigation. So here we see how do we detect them. So let's consider a 8N GMAC. So this is your DUT under consideration, which we call it as DUSA, Design Under Safety Assessment. 8N GMAC has unit inputs and the outputs that control the vehicle parameters. Let's say there can be faults that occur inside the GMAC. So one of the faults can pass through and affect the vehicle parameters. That actually violates the safety goal. So the failure as defined in ISO 26262 is the termination of intended behavior. That means a fault that occurred inside 8N GMAC has actually violated the safety goal. So how do you detect them? Safety mechanism is supposed to detect, mitigate, tolerate faults, control, avoid failures. Let's have another 8N GMAC, which we call it as shadow. Give the same inputs, take out the outputs and compare with the master 8N GMAC. So now the fault also goes to the compare your outputs, and then one unit is functioning faulty and another unit is functioning correctly. So by comparing these outputs, you can detect the fault that occurred in the master. Actually, the faults that are occurring in 8N GMAC master is controlling the vehicle parameters and violating the safety goals. So in a way, we are detecting a fault that occurred in the master. Probability of multiple faults occurring in both of the MACs is very, very low. So in this way, you're actually detecting the fault. How do you mitigate as well as detect? So now instantiate another shadow 8N GMAC. So now two of them are functioning correctly and one of them is faulty. So there will be a majority voter that actually gives the output to the vehicle parameters. And because two of the MACs are functioning correctly, so you always get a correct output and there will not be any safety goal violated because of the master 8N GMAC has some faults. Again, the principle here is the probability of faults occurring in all three simultaneously is very, very low. Here, the safety mechanism, which is two MACs and a majority voter, is actually making the mitigation mechanism possible. So here, fault is not detected, but you always get the right output. There are latent faults present in the system. You can also have a detection mechanism and the fault can be detected. So in that way, you can remove the latent faults. So simplifying the ISO 26262 requirements, semiconductor chips need to have a safety mechanism to detect or correct faults within the budgeted time interval. SM needs to be running continuously while the device is operating. And we should have a diagnostic coverage for this safety mechanism and need to be able to cover not less than N%. And for example, ASIL D should cover more than 99%. So we've been using the word ASIL, and in the coming slide, we'll see what is the Automotive Safety Integrity Level in detail. So Automotive Safety Integrity Level is defined as the acceptable risk level for different automotive electronic applications. There are three parameters that decide ASIL level: severity, exposure, and controllability. Severity is in three levels: no injuries, light injury, or life-threatening injuries. Exposure is low probability, medium probability, and high probability, and no probability at all, extremely low probability. And controllability, this is by the driver. It's easy to control, normal to control, or uncontrollable at all, right? So let's see at the highest level. It's life-threatening injuries, severity is high. Exposure is very high probable, and it can happen anytime. And controllability is completely uncontrollable. So this is defined as ASIL D. At the lowest level, there are no injuries, extremely low probability, and easy to control. This is just termed as quality management. So there are ASIL levels A, B, C, D, and D will be at the top of the ASIL levels. And ISO 26262 defines different fault types and also the metrics related to that. Safe faults, faults that will not violate the safety goal. Single point fault, fault that violates the safety goal and there is no safety mechanism present. Residual fault, fault that violates the safety goal and there is a safety mechanism present, but they are not covering enough. multi-point faults, or the combination of more than one fault that violates the safety goal. Fault metrics are defined for each ASIL level, like fit rate, SPFM, single point fault metric, and latent fault metric. For D, for example, ASIL D, a fit rate of less than 10 is required, and SPFM of greater than 99%, and LFM of greater than 90%. More details of fit rates while we talk about the soft errors. Number of ways failure can occur is defined in the terms of failure modes. Let's consider a DUT and a top level module with safety mechanism. So failure mode is defined as the manner in which an element can fail to provide the intended behavior. The failure mode is a set of signals violating the safety goal, which are called failure strobes, and signals used for fault detection strobes, faults that cause failures. So the faults can be all around the place in the design. These are the three different things that define a failure mode. ISO 26262 defines metrics calculated by injecting random faults and analyze these faults' behavior to assess how effective is your safety mechanism for each and every failure mode. What is the mechanism of measuring fault coverage today? So there can be many faults like depicted here. Fault simulation used to measure the coverage by injecting faults and simulating repeatedly. Runtime is like gate level simulation time multiplied by number of faults. Even if you do some optimizations, it takes many weeks. And all traditional fault simulators are built on manufacturing tests. They're very slow for automotive. All these traditional fault simulators have complex setup and methodologies that involve multiple tools. What are the challenges in FUSA verification currently? Failure mode identification. So optimal failure and detection strobes and faults is the key. Number of faults to analyze. There are a very large number as design grows. Design setup for FUSA verification. Complex tools and methodologies with many tools. Fault simulation turnaround time, more than often it's months. Software analysis and selective hardening. All faults or errors are not treated the same way. So software has to have a different treatment. Interface with FMEDA analysis. So to get away with these challenges, you need to have the optimized failure and detection strobe techniques, optimization techniques to reduce fault list for various stages at FUSA, simple and single reusable setup throughout the fault analysis. Fault simulation time should be faster. You need to have a platform to calculate AVF for all the flops in the design. Easy to interface with the FMEDA. So to get away with these challenges, we introduce Optima Safety Platform. Here we are presenting Optima Safety Platform with all its core engines and how user interacts with Optima Safety Platform. User provides the RTL or gate level design, a stimulus in the form of VCD, and the safety setup. We'll study safety setup in detail in the coming slides. But right now, assume that safety setup is nothing but providing the failure mode information. So this safety setup also can be generated by FMEDA managers, and this FMEDA can also be input to the Optima Safety Platform. So as described in first few slides, that Optima Safety Platform contains Optima SE, static analysis, Optima HE, hard error analysis, Optima SE is soft error analysis, and Optima SEC is the security verification. All these are powered by the Optima fault injection engine. So we have Optima DB, and we have debug and visibility of all the reports. So the overall methodology of OSP is provided to get away with the challenges that are there in the current FUSA verification. Define safety setup, which should be simple and valid throughout the analysis. Static analysis to do only on the relevant and optimized fault list. Identification of safety issues and quick inputs to the FMEDA. Constant analysis, further reduce the fault list based on the stimulus. Hard error analysis to identify single point and residual faults and calculate the diagnostic coverages SPFM and LFM. Soft error analysis is done for the selective hardening and the fit rate calculations, as well as SPFM for transient faults. Let's look in detail about the Optima SA static analysis. Objective of Optima SA static analysis is run on RTL or GL. So user can run on RTL to identify safety issues early in the design cycle. gate level for the final result. It should be very simple setup and reusable for the entire full verification. No fault simulation at this stage, zero time for the results, so that you can rerun daily for regressions on RTL changes. One of the main objectives of Optima ASIL is also to manage the fault list by optimizing using fault pruning, fault collapsing, fault optimization, and it should be fast enough so that you can run on sample faults or exhaustive fault list. Total number of faults in the design is very large as design grows. For example, an AND gate with 2 input and 1 output has 6 faults. Optimizing the fault list will reduce the time for the ISO 26262 metrics. Optimization involves placing faults only on the relevant hierarchies and placeable fault list pruning and placeable fault list collapsing. What are the relevant faults? So just remember, we considered one SOC, which has DUT and safety mechanism and different faults, having detection strobes and failure strobes identified, which we call as a failure mode. So static analysis based on the failure and detection strobe should identify the COI, cone of inference, to be established and find out the relevant faults only. You don't need to consider all the faults. Like a cone of inference is established based on the failure strobe, based on detection strobe. And now if you just look at the cone of influences based on detection and failure strobes, you can see only F1 and F2 are relevant. The rest of the faults are not relevant at all. Right away, you have reduced from 10 faults to 2 faults only, which is F1 and F2. So you may see that F5 is also in the COI of failure strobe, but FI is somewhere else, not in the DUT. Your main objective is to analyze DUT for faults and the effectiveness of safety mechanism. So this saves a lot of debug time to identify relevant faults, and there is no complex setup for constraining faults. Optima ASIL straight away finds F1 and F2 as relevant faults and do analysis only on those two. And it also does the fault collapsing. Fault collapsing is nothing but finding out the equivalent faults at the inputs and outputs. Consider only the relevant faults. So collapsed faults are counted but not executed. So in this way, you can save a lot of time. So how do you define the safety setup? So we've been hearing safety setup word for quite a few slides. So how do you define the safety setup? So let's consider DUSA, which is designed under safety analysis with primary inputs and primary outputs. So safety setup is nothing but the simple way of capturing your failure mode information, safety related information, failure strobes, and the condition signals. So sometimes the failure has to be measured with a condition, right? So failure strobes are defined with condition signals and detection strobes and their condition signals. These detection and failure strobes can be internal signals or primary outputs. Now, a COI is established for failure strobes and a COI is also established for detection strobes. So let's consider if a fault occurs in the complete DUSA area, what are the effects of these faults? A fault occurring in this red region, it ends up in the failure strobe. That means it is causing the DUSA to fail, right? So we call these faults as unsafe because it is ending up at the failure strobe. And same way, it is not going to the detection strobe. It is only ending up at the failure strobe. So it is invisible. So we call it as UI, which is unsafe invisible. Safe invisible, that means it is safe because it's not ending up at the failure strobe. Invisible because it's not ending up at detection strobe either. Similarly, we can call a fault occurring in this blue region as SV, safe because the fault is not ending up at failure, visible because it's ending up at detection strobe. UV are the faults between these two COI regions. So this is the intersection of the blue region and the red region. So we call them as UV, which is unsafe visible. Unsafe because they end up in the failure strobes. Visible because they end up in the detection strobes. So these are the potentially detectable faults, and this is the area of interest for further analysis. So how do you define safety setup? It's a simple command with detection strobes and set fault strobes. So if you use -default, that means all the primary outputs are considered for the failure strobes, and you need to use the prepare command. As more and more failure strobes and more safety setups are defined, it becomes very complex. More failure modes, more complex the safety setup. So Optima SA supports multiple safety setup analysis. You can do what if analysis and arrive at optimum safety setup. So Optima SA flow, it's very simple and no simulation at this stage. You load the design, you configure the safety setup using the safety setup command, run the static analysis, examine SA results. Are you meeting the requirements? So go to the Optima hard error analysis, which is the fault simulation tool, or export data to FMEDA tool. If you're not meeting the requirements, examine the UI area. So what are the UI as defined in the previous slide, that they are unsafe and invisible. That means there are early safety issues that are identified by this. If it is invisible, that means you don't have a safety mechanism. So manually you add detection points based on the examination. This is the manual process. You iterate, run static analysis again, see if you still find the UI areas. If you have UI faults, again add some more detection points to make sure that they are all detectable. So ultimate aim is to reduce UI to 0. That means all the faults have a safety mechanism and a detection point. This is a manual iteration process. We also have an automated process. You can run the coverage maximizer statically, add detection point based on the coverage maximizer output, and do the iteration again. So in this way, you can close the loop automatically also. So after doing static analysis, what are the fault statuses? SI, safe invisible, safe visible, UI, unsafe invisible, UV, unsafe visible. So only relevant faults to be analyzed. The relevant faults here are unsafe invisible. That means there is no safety mechanism which forms as single point fault. Unsafe visible, these are all possible detects, and these are the diagnostic coverage. So you have not yet simulated but detected as possible, so you can consider them as diagnostic coverage as well. How do you map static analysis results to ISO 26262 metrics? Safe faults as SI, single point faults as UI, residual faults as UV, which are to be simulated, need to be simulated, UV to be finding out, and detected also to the UV, and latent faults to SV. So in this way, you have straight away mapping to the static analysis results. And you can take these results to the FMEDA manager as well. Let's look at Optima HE hard error fault simulation engine, HEFS. So how is the coverage closure using fault simulation works? Write tests, run fault simulation. Is coverage met? Yes, you're done. No, develop methods to improve coverage, fine-tune the tests, and iterate over the tests. What are the challenges? It takes a long time for the simulation, fault simulation to run. And it's very challenging to find the coverage holes. It's very hard to detect. So to get away with the problems, Optima HE actually identifies only UV faults. UV faults, as we discussed, the UV area, LO area from static analysis. And users also can run all the faults or any combination of faults. And faults analyzed by CA. So Optima HE has an option to run constant analysis. And whatever faults marked by constant analysis as blocked or masked or safe are not considered. So HEFS is run to find how many potential UV faults are actually detected. So whatever static analysis is found is only potentially detectable. So you need to run fault simulation to actually determine that a fault can be detected at the detection point. So status of UV faults after HEFS is UVD, which are faults detected, UVR, which are not detected, that's why they are residual, UV&R, these are the faults that are not run by the OSP for some reasons. So how do you run fault simulation? You have the safety setup and you provide the VCD, and you also have run static analysis and have all this segregation of faults like SI, SV, UV, and UI. As discussed in the previous slide, only UV faults are considered by default, and the user can run on any combination. So once you run UV faults, so you will get UVD, which are unsafe, visible, detected, actually detected by simulation. And there are some faults which are not detected by simulation. So that are called the residual faults. What is the value add of Optima HE? Allows accurate measurement. Fault simulation speed is very high with pruning and collapsing. No need to do the sample-based fault campaign. It reduces the wait time. It's immense reduction of compute power needed for FUSA verification. And FUSA work can start early in the project because Optima HE works on RTL as well. This allows good estimation and effectiveness of your safety mechanism very early in the project cycle. What is the Optima HE flow? Load the design, commands used for analyze and elaborate. Configure the safety setup. Safety setup is the command. And run SEA, that is the static analysis. We are using the same setup as we did with the static analysis. So use the same setup. Followed by constant analysis. Run CA is the command. Hard error fault simulation, run HE is the command. And coverage maximizer to identify the coverage holes. So these three forms a part of hard error analysis. CA, constant analysis, HE, hard error analysis, and CM as the coverage maximizer. So if you see here, there are only few commands to be used, and most of the setup is being reused from static analysis phase. How do you map the Optima HE analysis to ISO 26262 metrics? As we have seen, Optima HE runs on UV faults from static analysis, and these UV faults will further be segregated into UVD, which is UV detected, and UVR, which is UV residual. Let's see the whole flow chart of how ISO 26262 metrics are calculated and faults are segregated. You have a hardware element. Is it safety related element? No. Then this is a non-safety related. So any faults that get into this is not relevant. So they are safe, SI. And you have different failure modes as defined in the safety setup. And these faults are potential to violate safety goal? Yes. And is there a safety mechanism? No. So if there is no safety mechanism, all the faults will be segregated into UI. So this UI faults you got while doing static analysis itself. So you have created different detection points to reduce it. Let's assume that you still have faults that are not catered by a safety mechanism. So you call it as UI faults, and you directly get it from this table. If there is a safety mechanism, yes, so that's what becomes the UV fault. These UV faults are simulated using Optima HE engine, and once it is simulated, whatever are not detected, they become residual, UVR. So you straight away get this number from the analysis triangles. If they are detected, they become UVD. And there are some faults that came from static analysis, which are SV. They are potential to violate safety goal. Right now, they may not, because multi-point faults are nothing but in combination only they can violate the safety goal. So this UVD and SV becomes the multi-point faults. So these multi-point faults are further analyzed. If they are not affecting any safety goal, they become SI. If they affect, then again, you have to check for a safety mechanism present. This is the secondary safety mechanism you're talking about. If yes, and then it becomes the SVD or multi-point detected. If no, it becomes SV undetected. So in this way, whatever analysis you have done from Optima SA, static analysis, and Optima HE, hard error analysis, all the fault statuses have been directly mapped into the ISO 26262 jargon. So it's very easy for the user to identify faults and their statuses and calculate the ISO 26262 metrics very easily. Let's look at the Optima SE software analysis. So before getting into details of software and its analysis, let's understand what is the fit rate. So fit rate is nothing but failure in time, that is number of failures in 1 billion hours. ISO 26262 requires that the range of fit rate will be at the order of 100. One fit means one failure in 114,000 years. 100 fit means one failure in 1,000 years. Does it really matter? Okay, let's consider if a company sells 1 million cars of a certain model with fit rate 100. That's what ISO 26262 defines. And this company has followed ISO 26262 standard. So they have each car 100 fit rate and 1 million cars on the road. So the fit of all the cars put together will be 1 million and 100 fit rate. They will have one failure in every 10 hours. That's dangerous. So to calculate fit rates, you need to worry about SEU faults. We'll be focusing on bit flips and a single flops and their mechanisms of avoiding it, like DMR and TMR. So how do you correct? Like we have already seen it, TMR and DMR. So this TMR and DMR can be implemented at the system level or at the flop level. So let's see at the system level redundancy to avoid soft errors. System level redundancy, you will have lockstep DMR. That means two systems are in parallel working and you take out the best out of it. So that means it increases 2x of the cost. 3x TMR, that means single fault correction and dual fault detection. That means three systems are in parallel working and there will be a majority voter to give you the correct result. This increases cost by 3x. TMRs of TMRs, that means it can compare three implementations and protect against design errors as well. But look at the cost, it's 9x of the cost, very, very expensive. We can also have redundancy at the flip-flop level, like the TMR, triple module redundancy, where three flops have been instantiated and there will be a majority voter that selects the correct result. You can also have DMR with the C element. If we compare flip-flop hardening overheads, unit level lockstep mechanism will have 70% more silicon, hardening of every flip-flop in the design, that means 30% more silicon. Only selective, that means 1 to 5% of the flops only can be hardened, that means 1 to 5% more silicon. You can also use older silicon nodes so as to reduce the effect of soft error, or use special red hard silicon technology, which is very, very expensive. Among all these things, what is effective is that selective flip-flop hardening, which actually gives overhead of only 1 to 5% more silicon. And let's look into that in more detail. So what is selective flip-flop hardening? Hardened flip-flops can eliminate transient faults. So only a small proportion of flops to be hardened. How do you find out? So we have to find out something called AVF, architectural vulnerability factor, which is calculated for each flip-flop, and the fit rate is calculated based on AVF. And this fit can be optimized using iterative fault simulations while swapping different flops. So today it requires many months of fault simulation for analysis to find out which flops have to be hardened. So the definition of AVF is nothing but the probability that a fault happens on a flip-flop and propagates to the safety goal output. There can be a lot of flops in the design that are logically masked. Can we leverage those conditions to calculate AVF? Calculating a reliable AVF involves multiple SE fault simulations that has to be performed for each flop, and each soft error has to be injected at different time cycle. Optima recommends 50 to 100 faults per flop at various time cycles. So each fault in the simulation can end up with one of the statuses. Propagated, the fault propagated to a safety critical node or the output. Detected, the fault has ended at the detection strobe. Dissipated, the fault has dissipated or disappeared without reaching any of these failure strobe or the detection strobe. EOT is the end of trace. The fault sim has reached the end of the trace because it has not ended up with any of the above statuses. So AVF is defined as number of propagated faults divided by total fault simulations executed. So how do you calculate the fit rates based on this AVF? Let's assume that you don't know AVF and you have not calculated AVF. So fit rate of the chip will be calculated as n number of flops in the design multiplied by the fit rate as unhardened flip-flop. And you find AVF for each flop using Optima SE. So fit rate of the chip now becomes AVF multiplied by the fit rate of unhardened. So if AVF of most of the flops are close to 0, that means you achieved your fit rate based on the ISO 26262 recommendations, then you stop here. Now let's assume that you are doing selective hardening only for some flops. So now the fit rate of the chip becomes the hardened flip-flops multiplied by the AVF and unhardened flip-flop fit rates multiplied by the AVF. In this way, fit rate can be calculated based on the AVF you have calculated. And in our observations, the top 5% of the flops, if you can harden it, you may achieve the fit rate. You can accurately calculate AVF and the fit rate that is as per the ASIL level you have chosen. So what is the requirement of this software analysis? You need to have ultra-fast simulator like Optima SE and a dedicated integrated app like Optima Safety Platform. So why you need the fastest simulator is that you need to do the calculation accurately for AVF that requires 50 fault simulations per flop and multiplied by the number of flops, millions of fault simulations, and using regular simulators will take a long time. And you need to have a dedicated integrated app like OSPs because you need to do multi-million simulations and you need a management system so that you can collect all the results of the flop and calculate the AVF. So OSP SE advantage is optimal and simple safety setup being used. User can specify number of faults to be injected on a flop. Fault placement times, like you can have equal time windows, total simulation time by number of faults, or random placement of the times and user specified times. Fault types can be flip fault, that is the value of the target flop at the output can be flipped at the placement timestamp, or a constant, a stuck at fault is placed at the target flop for the specified timing window. So this is the fastest simulation engine for AVF and field calculations and also for the SPFM for transient faults. This is the overall advantage of Optima Safety Platform. All the engines are built in and the interaction with the user is very easy. Thank you very much. Any questions?